So welcome to the September sharing circle for the 1 Million Empaths community. And generally speaking, we do not record these sessions so that people can openly speak and confidentially speak. However, I felt this morning that it was really important to bring forward some of my own personal reflection, maybe as something that I'm observing coming up within our community, within my clients, within the larger collective. And what I wanted to talk about were two cards that came up in a reading that I did yesterday. And this is the first one. So the first one is, this is the youth or the rebel, right? And so you see that he's sitting here, he's kind of on the mountaintop, sort of a teenager, adolescent style, and he has this staff of wisdom, right? But he can only reach about halfway up. So we all know, when we were this age, that we knew what we knew. We thought we knew a lot more than what we did. But at the top is really like the North Star. And I know it's a little bit blurry, so I'm trying to make it so you can see. And of course, here's, maybe his trusted loyal dog or wolf or whatever you want to call that. And, the rebel energy is really cool. And of course, we need that sometimes when we are coming into that place in our life that we need to gain more independence, when we want to assert ourselves, when we want to develop this ability to stand on our own 2 feet, to make our own way, to set our own boundaries, to do those kinds of things. And I did a lot of reflection on this rebel energy in my own life and where that has come up more positively and where that has kind of come back to bite me in a way. So the second card that came up is the 8 of Swords. And the swords are always the mental energy, our mindset, the way that we perceive the world. And you can see here that he has one sword that's pointed up. So that's more transcendent energy, more, if you will, more spiritual consciousness energy. And then there's another sword which is coming down, and in his hand, it literally is poking his hand and making it bleed. And so sometimes when we have a mindset, it can either be positive and uplifting, or it can be negatively impacting us. And so I wanted to share about my own personal journey with basically my own inner rebel, right? I like my inner rebel. I'm an Aries. So we already kind of have that naturally. But I wanted to share with you a few areas where this has come up in my life and to give you an example of how what we focus on in terms of law of attraction, what we focus on expands. And when we can make decisions based on, this is the thing I don't want, so I'm going to try to move and swing the pendulum all the way over to the other side, or we can focus on what we do want. And here's how that shows up for me. So when I was a child, I grew up on a farm on the western side of the United States. It was wonderful. My parents went out and lived in the wilderness. We raised all of our own vegetables. We did canning. We raised our own animals. It was a great way to grow up, and we learned independence and self-sufficiency. And we ate really, really well. I ate tofu and cashew butter and sprouts and, all the superfoods before superfoods were even like a thing, right? This was like in the 1970s. And so I grew up this way, right? And some of that food I liked and some of that food I didn't. But my family was fairly cognizant of not eating a lot of sweets, a lot of junk food. I think I probably didn't drink a can of soda until maybe I was like, I don't know, a teenager or something like that. And so when I got out on my own as a young adult, I kind of felt in some ways I had internalized this idea that I was deprived, that being forced to eat all this healthy food had deprived me of something that I didn't get to do. So I went to all the fast food restaurants I could. I ate out all the time. I ate sweets. I ate junk food. I had bags of chips. I drank pop like it was going out of style, or soda, or whatever you call it in your part of the world. And I was like, yes, here's my inner rebel, right? My inner rebel is like, I'm going to eat what I want. I am going to manage my own food. I'm not going to eat those yucky sprouts and that avocado toast and like all this stuff that, my parents wanted me to eat. And I did, and I got to do that. And I obviously enjoyed some of that, and some of the food was very tasty. But then what happened is I gained 65 pounds, right? So in the attempt to like make my own choice, I actually like put the spear into my own hand. And it took a long time for me to lose most of that weight and to come into this much healthier relationship with food. So I had this pendulum swing. One side was completely organic, no junk food, no anything. And then the other side was like, I'm going to eat whatever the hell I want to. And there's no consequence to this. And yet there is a consequence to it, right? And so we come into this place. And now when I'm choosing food, I sometimes eat ice cream and I sometimes eat junk food. But I eat it in a more limited amount. And mostly I choose healthy food. Like right before we got on, I had an orange. And I eat mostly whole foods and lean meats and those kinds of things because it makes me feel good. It makes my body feel good. And I'm doing it not because I'm rebelling against something that I did or did not have. I'm doing it because this is a choice I'm making for me, for my own health and my own vitality. So this is one example of where the rebel can kind of feel good in the moment and take us out of this plane. We get into that ego place and we're like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And then it has consequences, right? So the second piece is that I grew up, primarily in poverty. When I was a very young child, we lived in a very small, modest house, and we didn't even have indoor plumbing. We didn't even have an indoor bathroom. Like there was an outhouse in the back. So this is like my roots, right? And I came up. Now, we didn't have a lot of financial wealth, but we did have a lot of wealth of laughter and love and creativity and getting, and I got to be myself as a young empath HSP. So there was enormous wealth in other ways that I was able to see later on in my adult life. But at the time, I saw my friends and they had fancy things and they had satellite dishes and they had the best shoes and they had these things. And so when I got out on my own, I decided I was going to be very ambitious and I was going to strive to make a lot of money, to put money in investment accounts, and I had stock accounts, and I would strive for promotions at work, and I wanted the bigger title and the bigger paycheck. And I even bought a red sports car that had leather seats and like a sunroof and a kick-ass stereo, and I really kind of miss that car. Actually, it was really fun. But and as a part of this, like rebelling against this idea of poverty mentality, like I'm never going to go back to poverty again. I became a workaholic and I worked like 65, 70 hours a week, right? And then about 4 years ago, my sensitive nervous system and my body said, no more, you just can't do this anymore. And I had complete burnout. And I spent about 6 months laying on the couch. I could barely work. I could barely even walk. I could barely get around. I had extreme fatigue. And if it wasn't for that retirement account that fortunately I had put money into, I don't know how I would have even not been homeless during that time. So I went from extreme poverty, which was not really my choice as a child, to then like wanting this wealth and wanting to do that as a rebellious act of like, I'm never going to go back into that again. And ironically, here I came again into this space where I was hurting myself. And I had to face that again. I had to face my own fears around money, around scarcity, around what is enough, around the fact that I have intrinsic value just because I am here. I'm a being, I'm a spiritual being. And that I was able to let go of that striving, of that needing to have those fancy things. Sometimes I like to have fancy things and sometimes I don't. I decide not to spend money, but I do it very consciously. And of course, I want my business, and this was the impetus to me starting Perceptive Souls and then beginning and opening up this community and these things. And now when I want more abundance, it's because I want to be able to serve more people. I want to be deep into my soul mission. And so there's a difference in the way that what is the motivation that we're coming from? Are we pushing against something? Are we trying to strive to not have that and not be that and not ever go through that pain again so much that we actually put ourselves back into that position inadvertently? And the third piece is that I came from a family system. A lot of my family members have been through divorces, many of them multiple divorces. So it was very difficult for me to see what a healthy, loving, and reciprocal relationship looked like. Mostly I saw relationships that came together and then at some point they failed. And this was the perception that I had as a child. And so I was dating my high school sweetheart, and over the summer after we graduated, he proposed to me and we got engaged, and we were going to get married when we both turned 19. And my family was like, no, you should wait until you're older. You should go to college. You should like learn who you are. And my rebel kicked in and I was like, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm going to be the person in my family that's going to make marriage work. And so I did. I got married at age 19, even though there was a part of me that knew that that wasn't the right choice for me and that they had some some truth and some wisdom to tell, because here I could only see halfway up the wisdom stick. I wasn't up here, and my family, regardless of the different relationships they had traveled farther up. They knew a little bit more than I did about this. And I stayed in that relationship for 20 years because I was determined to make this work no matter what. I was going to be the person who was successful at being married. And that was the most dysfunctional and destructive relationship I've ever been in my life. And I ended up getting divorced anyway. So then I came over the healing work that I've done and the inner work that I've done over this. I came to the understanding that each of these relationships in my life, including this one, was some of my biggest teaching about the fact that all of this striving and all of this pushing against was never really helpful for me. Now, what I'm going to say about this, though, is that there are certain things that I think the rebel can be really helpful for. I am a really outspoken proponent against systemic racism. I am about unity consciousness. I am a big, I donate so that people can have their basic needs met, like food and water and shelter. There are things where I say this in our world is not acceptable, and I'm actually going to take action on it. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to be an activist. So in that case, there is some points where that rebel, that one that's saying, hey, just because it's always been done this way or just because it's always showed up this way doesn't mean that this is the way that we need to continue to do it. It can be positive. It's just a matter of being really cognizant of why we're making a particular decision. Are we making a particular decision in rebellion to our family system, in rebellion to the wounding and the things that we saw or that we felt or we had a perception when we were 5? But now, we're not 5 anymore. And now we have the ability to understand how this can be different and how we can make this choice. And what I've found in my own experience is anytime I get into that rebel energy from that place of, I don't want this, it is going to come back around and I get to look at it anyway. So it's like, okay, let me just look at this from the beginning. Let me just see and let me face it and let me explore it. And yes, it might feel momentarily painful, but it's going to be okay. And as I went by my altar before we got on this call, what came up was this beautiful piece of snakeskin that I found in the forest not too long ago. And of course, the snakeskin is very symbolic of transformation. It is symbolic of when we have been in a particular form, a particular body, and we're ready to expand. And we need to shed off these old beliefs, these old mindsets, these old feelings, these old woundings. This is a lot of what's happening right now in the collective. I follow several intuitive readers that I have a great deal of respect for. And what they're saying is that from the eclipse that happened in July and the eclipse that will happen in December is an enormous amount of inner child work for everyone on an individual level, on a collective level. We're looking at family systems, we're looking at government systems, we're looking at all of this stuff where we've been making decisions from a fear-based place, from a scarcity mentality, from a, well, I don't want this, so I'm going to strive to do something superficial to like mask the thing instead of actually addressing it. And the last thing I'll share is that I've been reading this book called The Wisdom of Insecurity, Message for an Age of Anxiety from Alan Watts. And Alan Watts was an interpreter of Zen Buddhism and a multiple time author and also one of the best known spiritual philosophers. His work is very deep, so I can read about a page and then I need to like meditate on it for 2 days, but it's okay. I'm just taking it at my pace. And I wanted to just read briefly this one page, which really kind of to me talks about higher consciousness versus ego consciousness and how we approach life. So we seem to be like flies caught in honey. Because life is sweet, we do not want to give it up. And what he's talking about is we don't want to die, right? Like that's our deepest human fear. Yet the more we become involved in it, the more we feel trapped, limited, and frustrated. We love it and hate it at the same time. We fall in love with people and possessions only to be tortured by anxiety for them. The conflict is not only between ourselves and the surrounding universe, it is between ourselves and ourselves. For intractable nature is both around and within us. The exasperating life, which is at once lovable and perishable, pleasant and painful, a blessing and a curse, is also the life of our own bodies. It is as if we are divided into two parts. On the one hand, there is the conscious I, a once intrigued and baffled, the creature who is caught in the trap. On the other hand, there is me, and me is a part of nature. So I think the way he's speaking of I is like higher consciousness, and me is the ego self. The wayward flesh with all its concurrently beautiful and frustrating limitations. I fancies itself a reasonable fellow, and is forever criticizing me for its perversity, for having passions which get I into trouble, for being so easily subject to painful and irritating diseases, for having organs that wear out, and for having appetites which can never be satisfied. So this was what I really wanted to present today, was just my own reflection. And I know this is really deep work, but it's like, what is that motivation that we're coming from? Well, how are we deciding to make decisions going forward in our life? And this, for me, this spiritual path is all about continuing to deepen my awareness and being present. And a lot of what Alan Watts talks about is the reason there's wisdom in insecurity is because what we're always trying to do is either heal the past or have an expectation of the future that we could never get to, and we're not actually here present. We're not actually in this moment. We're not actually appreciating what's happening. We're not actually being conscious about the decisions we're making here. And so I hope this is helpful to you. I'm now going to turn off the recording so we can open it up to those who are able to be here live and dive deeper into this and anything else that people want to bring through.